first began painting when I was in first grade, and my painting teacher let me use her brushes and her paints, and I began to paint this blue sky. And when I got home that night, I just dreamt about how it felt to paint with brushes and just going across the canvas to create something. From the very first moment that I ever began painting, I loved making art. But when I went to college and I was deciding what to do next, I think some of the truth is that I didn't have the courage to really go what was in my heart, and that would have been to be an artist. Instead, I was thinking about a job I could do that was intellectually challenging, where I would go in and no day would ever be the same. My papa was a lawyer for over 50 years in Florida. He started his own law firm. He loved it. He absolutely loved what he did. He also was in a position to help a lot of people. So I saw that in his life, but I don't think I asked myself really the question, or maybe I didn't know myself well enough, like just because that was his path, was that really my path as well? So I followed in his footsteps and also chose to go to law school and to practice law for a number of years. Although there were parts of practicing law that I really loved, at the end of the day, that wasn't what was truly in my soul to do. I was 33 years old, and that was when Papa passed away. And that was also the time in my law career where you were beginning to really consider and prepare for if you were going to go on to a partnership track. I was working late and I saw so many of the partners were still there working. I knew, like, this is kind of a glimpse into years down the road, and is this really what I'm supposed to be doing? I decided to leave my job. I sold my house in Jacksonville, Florida. I had looked at SCAD, but of course, I just flat didn't have the courage to go after it. I've had this momentous change in my life with the loss of Papa, and I found that courage. I had not formally taken art classes in undergrad, and so even though I had my JD, my LLM, which is my Master's of Law, I was going back to undergrad. So I was, back with 18-year-old freshmen. I can honestly say that one of the most terrifying moments of my life was when I stood outside of our drawing classroom and I looked, and I saw the easel set up and I had my little box of pencils and I thought, what have I done? What if I go in here and I find out that I'm not that good? It turns out for me that coming to SCAD was a great choice. I had an amazing experience. It really set me on the path to where I am now. I have the amazing pleasure of getting to share my studio space with someone who is my best friend, someone who is my favorite artist in the world. That's my husband, Torres. Although we're in the same space, I'm doing my printmaking. He's in his own area of the studio with his paintings. There are these moments, it just happened last week, for example, where I got really stuck on a piece. So I turned to Alexi, I showed him what I was working on, and immediately he just had some ideas. When he paints as though it's woven like basket weaving, and my work is like literally woven paper pieces. I had begun exploring woven paper pieces when I was in art school. Before I met him, my woven pieces, I began developing them even further. And perhaps that's a little bit in response to his work. In 2018, I went with my husband Alexi to Miami for the Art Basel fairs. Coming up then to 2019, I had the opportunity to show some pieces at the Pulse Art Fair. I felt really a calling. I thought, I need to make some pieces about Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and I was able to make 2 of my woven screen prints of RBG that went down to the Pulse Art Fair. It was wild. It was beyond my dreams, truly. Both pieces sold in the first 10 minutes, I would say. People crying. And I know that so much of that has to do with her work and her legacy. And I just had the honor to be able to make some pieces about her. But I also listened to that little voice of inspiration, that said, Julie, you're feeling called to make this work. You have something to say about this, so let's do it. Here in the studio, I have a few mementos. Behind me is this old desk here. As I mentioned, my papa was an attorney, and that desk is what he had in his law firm. So it means so much to me to have this desk, and now it's in my art studio. He never found out that I was going to pursue being an artist, but somehow I know that his spirit knows. Other thing that I found when we were going through the things in his office, this is his old Black's Law Dictionary from, the 1960s, University of Florida. That's where he went. It still has his signature in here. Friends that I went to law school with, they have sent me their old law books. I have begun taking the pages out of the law books, cutting it up and making that into paper thread. I'm not quite ready to cut Papa's up yet. There was someone who had come here to help me in the studio. They loved to crochet. I thought, okay, I have this paper thread. What if I could find a way to crochet the jabot? Then I had the idea to do something that was a little subtle. I did just this black on black, the titles of every single case in which she had written dissenting opinion, and then I took that paper jabot and I sewed it on to the piece. I titled it Dissenter's Hope. This is the process of how I make the paper thread out of the law book pages. I've torn out some of the pages and I've already cut them. I think they're at like 1/2 inch cuts, and then I just come and I start tearing, but keeping it so that, it stays connected. This is one that I've already torn down. We have it here in the water. It doesn't need to soak for that long, just enough to begin to soften the paper. I'm fascinated by people who have the ability to unite and to bring us together. So in front of me, there's this piece of President Abraham Lincoln, the ultimate uniter. Dolly is another person who you say her name and there's just like a universal smile that comes across people's faces. She has found this special way of bringing us together. I have a piece of work that was acquired by the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It is in their permanent collection. If you go to the Met, you can actually ask to see this piece. It is this Super Diva screen print. There was a young woman in New York, and she bought one of the Super Diva prints. Her boyfriend's mother had worked for many years there at the Met and offered to have the piece framed at the Met for her. The gentleman who frames almost all of the work for the shows, he saw that little print and he had a feeling that the curators of the prints and drawing department might be interested in it, and so he shared it with them. It was a day in January, my phone rings, and when I answered the phone, the gentleman introduced himself and he said, and I'm calling from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I don't know if you're familiar with us. And I literally just about, fell on the floor. And so he shared the story of how the little Super Diva print had come to his attention, and he asked if I would be interested in donating one to the permanent collection, which of course I was. That's been maybe one of the most amazing experiences so far. Screen printing is what I do almost exclusively. I mean, I'm doing all of this by hand, mixing the ink, registering the paper, burning the screens. So it's a very labor-intensive process. You have to be in the moment, paying attention, through every step of the way to reach the final result where you have a completed screen print that looks like how you intended it to. I've chosen like a dark indigo purple color is what we're going to print for this third layer. So I'm getting my screen locked in here. You want to get the tension equal on each side. One of the most important steps of this process is figuring out where your paper needs to be positioned under the screen so that you get that layer printed in exactly the same place on each one. That's where this key image really comes in super useful. Also, the fact it's that black ink, because you can see it so well through the screen. So I just have the paper positioned under there. The last thing you got to make sure before you print is to put some tape over the registration marks. I have forgotten that more than once, and then you end up with registration marks on your print, which is not what you want. I love printing on, it's a Japanese paper. I think it's kitakata, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's very delicate. There's a strength to it. I was thinking about how can I take the printmaking process and the printmaking medium and create a work that can essentially hang on the wall next to a painting or exist next to a sculpture. And I thought, well, perhaps I can use the screen printing process to end up making a unique piece. And so that's what I'm the most well known for, is woven screen prints. To make those, I will print 2 copies essentially of the same image. So like this Abraham Lincoln, there were 2 of these printed on the Japanese paper, and I cut one of them vertically, I cut the other horizontally, and I weave them back together to then make the final piece. The woven screen prints are a way of taking a process that usually is done to make multiples and, working around to end up with something that is truly a unique piece. I always do one test print just to get the ink solidly through the screen, make sure it looks good before I use one of our good pieces of paper. It doesn't matter how many times you do it, there's still something just magic. You plan for your image, but you don't really know how it's gonna look till you do it. I'm gonna turn the vacuum on. It helps to hold the paper down to the table to help keep your paper in place while you're printing. So this one, I'm making 10 prints. These are gonna be woven pieces. So once I get into doing the scarf and the shawl, all the colors start changing. That's where there'll be 5 woven screen prints. If I'm doing an edition, I generally won't do more than 20 to 25. Spot on. I get asked a lot if I maintain my bar memberships, if I still practice law. The answer is no. I consider myself retired from law. I will just continue to bring law into my art, but I don't want to practice again. When you first hear art and law, it sounds like they are just polar opposites. How could there possibly be some common thread between them? There is a connection between them. I think one of the draws to law is the opportunity to advocate for another. The art is part of a dialogue, it's part of a conversation. In a way, it's bringing light to an issue. Because my belief is that the laws of a country are a reflection of the society. The issues that you see the Supreme Court grappling with each term, they're often just some of the most pressing issues of what's going on in our country. My practice of law has all given me now the insights to create the work that I'm making. So it was all for good. But what I have learned is that I had a knowing back then and I overrode it. You know, no matter what it is that you're going to do to be good at it, you've got to give it your all. I spend more time, more sleepless nights to get my artwork done than I ever did as a lawyer. No matter what your job is, you got to give it your all. You want to be giving it your all for something that also feeds your soul. It is such a difference to also know I love what I'm doing, and there's really not much else that I would rather be doing with this time. What's important, I think, in that process is still finding a way to maintain balance. For me, that is making sure that I have the energy and the love when I leave the studio to share with my family, so that you don't find yourself in a situation where you're just giving everything to your work and not leaving anything behind for the people that matter. When all of this is said and done, what you look back on is the love and the connection with people. That's something that I think about as I make my work, and just something that I've learned is to keep that balance in your life. My name is Julie Miller Torres, and I am a printmaker.